Hey, folkies! How are you all going? I thought I'd take a moment to record a short video about the scenario response essay for HSP402. I'm using a bunch of slides, which you'll probably find below this video, that talk about, what I'm doing and how I'm doing it and all of that sort of stuff. And as per always usual, I've got a set of stupid daggy little graphics that kind of demonstrate what we're doing in this assignment. You'll get a nice little scenario on the Milo site, and then you'll need to be able to respond to that scenario, thinking in terms of a police inspector in a particular area. Now, once you've sort of got your head into that space, then you'll need to go and do a bit of research, find some, national and international research that is actually relevant to that specific scenario that you're focused on. Then you'll need to find your policy. What policy is relevant in relation to this specific scenario, in addition to the legislation? What forms of, emergency management acts and so forth are relevant to this particular assignment? You'll need to think about who else you're going to collaborate with, all of those types of things in responding to this scenario. And then you'll need to type it up as an essay. Pretty easy. So just a reminder that this is the assignment task 1, which is the first of the UTAS submitted assessment for HSP 402. The due date for this assignment is on the Milo site for you. This is because they often change because so many people require assignment extensions. So I just keep the information up on the Milo site there for you. It is 2,000 words and that excludes your reference list, and it's weighted at 50%. I can assure you that you will struggle to fit it into that 2,000 word limit and that you'll probably find that you'll have to cut it down. I've given you an example up on the Milo site so that you can see the way that you can address this particular task. So you can see the type of language that they've used, the way that they've structured their paragraphs, the way that you don't have to go into a huge amount of detail and that you can actually sort of just tip your hat to the different legislations and so forth. So that's up there for you to give you a ballpark of how to address this in 2,000 words, because you could easily address this in 10,000 words as well. So our scenario is actually a flood scenario for this particular assignment. It's 10 a.m. on this last Sunday in November, and the BOM and the SES have issued flood warnings for your district. Warnings include information that by around 3 p.m, approximately 400 to 500 houses will be threatened and evacuation plans should be in place. You need to refer to the Tasmania Emergency Management Plan, the Emergency Management Act, the Emergency Evacuation Framework, any other relevant local municipal plans, and other material that you deem relevant, so that you can articulate your actions that should occur in the emergency management space to protect lives and property in dealing with this incident. Focus primarily on the strategic considerations, decisions and actions of DPFEM in a whole of government setting within the timeframes in this particular scenario. A secondary focus would be a tactical management of this problem. The task may not necessarily require you to resolve every particular issue that you identify, so you can sort of say, well, I don't have this information at this time, this is something that I may have to consider down the track. In your analysis, think in generic terms of the incident on any city within the state of Tasmania, draw on and apply set readings from the unit and wider research literature located using the library databases, Google Scholar, etc. to inform your response, and of course you'll need to reference that material. I have a couple of suggested structures for this, and that's because there's no set way that you can address it, I suppose. And if you think you've got a better set way, then please email me and let me know, because I'm more than happy to consider other ways of doing this. So in terms of the first suggested structure, we've got a basic introduction, which I'm sure you're all familiar with how to write now. You need to make sure that you include an introduction to the topic and a basic roadmap of what each section of this essay will discuss. Then you need to talk about your relevant legislation, plans, policies in dealing with the incident, in addition to your strategic issues and your tactical issues. You might want to structure the body of your response around key things that Tas Police should do or are planning to do within the context of legislation, plans, reviews, etc. So, strategic considerations, actions, decisions might take up 800 words. Tactical management of the problem might take up 800 words. And you might cut that up into different sections depending on what feels comfortable for you. All up, though, that section of the essay will be about 1600 words. Then you'll have a conclusion which summarises your main points and how you're going to move forward in terms of what you found. And of course, you'll have a list of references which aren't included in the word count. I also have an alternative structure that a great TASBOL student came up with the last time we did this particular assignment. Again, you've got your introduction, but then your discussion of your relevant legislation and so forth is cut up into different questions. What are the key issues at this time? What is the response strategy going to be and why? What is my mission? What are my key priorities and why? What instructions am I going to give to and whom? And what else should I consider at this stage? And that can be cut up into that 1600 words in any way that you see fit, depending on what you need to say and how. Then, of course, we've got the conclusion and your references. As we've done this assessment task in the past, we have actually got some feedback that we've provided to other students about, things that they've done well and they haven't done well. So first of all is always 1.5 line spacing. This is because it helps us to put the comments in easily. And it also helps you to read them easily. And I know that sounds ridiculous because we're marking online and you think that the online systems will be able to just change the way that you format things. It doesn't work that way. So we need to be able to make sure that we've got at least 1.5 line spacing so it's easy for us to read and make comments in an online space. Some people didn't use full paragraphs, and in fact a lot of people use 1 or 2 sentence paragraphs. These are not paragraphs, they are sentences and incomplete paragraphs. You must make sure that you have at least 5 sentences per paragraph so that you're developing all your ideas in full. Think about how you're going to group your ideas together in each paragraph so that you can have those full paragraphs developed. If you're wondering about how to do this with mentioning such a lot of material in a small space, look at the example on Milo and it will tell you what to do. Some people didn't actually talk about their examples or discussion about their decision making and their response to this scenario. So it was sort of broad brush strokes where they're saying, I need to talk to this person, I need to talk to this person, I need to do this, but it's not actually showing your decision making and bringing in justification for why you've decided to do that. You can't just say something like, I need to talk to Red Cross. You need to say, well, why? What's the reason you need to talk to Red Cross? So thinking about those types of things is pretty important. Some people focus on listing and describing and even quoting large tracts of legislation and agency policy to the neglect of discussion of key points. You do not need to quote this stuff. Just tip your hat to this stuff and move on. If you absolutely do need to quote legislation, put it in an appendices so it doesn't count in your word limit, but really you should not have to do that. Sometimes people don't connect their decisions with references to research literature, and this can be really problematic. It's a massive tick box on your rubric. So if you don't do this, you're going to be losing a lot of marks. Now, this doesn't mean you need to go into huge amounts of detail about the research. I don't need to know how many participants they had. I don't need to know necessarily about, the context in which it happened. I just need to know basically how it connects with what you're doing. So, for instance, if you're talking about vulnerable people in your particular scenario, then what does the research tell us about the considerations around vulnerable people for that specific scenario? That's what you need to go and do. So making sure that you just tip your hat to that sort of stuff is very important. Some people don't use subheadings. Now, although this can be problematic, difficult, all of those types of things, it can be really useful to use subheadings to tell the reader what you're doing. Most importantly, though, for you, it helps you actually structure your response, and it makes sure that you've got all the parts in your response that you need. Now, we did do a bit of a brainstorm in the workshop in the introductory days, so I'll put those images up online for you. Some other general tips: you can totally use first person, that is fine. Make sure you understand the role of different, the SES, for instance, the emergency management plan, and so forth. Start by reading the core readings that I've set you, and then branch out from there in terms of finding stuff that's specific to your scenario, which is a flood. And make sure that you've got a good understanding. That doesn't mean you have to read 1,000 pages of a review document. There's certain sections that you can scan to get a good understanding of what happened and what the key outcomes were, so that you can then apply it in your specific area. Make sure that you also connect to your literature. That's really important. So, for instance, you might tell the reader what your decisions are in relation to that scenario, and then tell the reader how it's guided by the emergency management manual or by other research that you've read around flood events in the past, right? And you bring that in by putting in those references. Make sure you have at least one reference per paragraph. This is pretty important. And use a standard essay structure. So, looking very briefly at the marking rubric, which is what we use to mark your assignment, we've got some basics things here in terms of the different criteria that we use. So, the first one is identifying the critical and emerging issues, and you'll talk through, each of these in however much detail you need to. But you can see that it says you've clearly and specifically identified core and critical emerging issues related to a particular scenario, and provided detailed discussion of those issues. Now, again, that doesn't mean you have to go into 10th part harmony about how you're going to evacuate livestock or anything like that. It's just about making sure that you've got that discussion in the response. Then we've got, thinking about the planning, implementation, and communication strategies and processes. You've specifically and clearly articulated the planning, implementation, and communication strategies and processes related to a critical incident. It's pretty straightforward, really. Then we're critically analysing the strategic and tactical decisions. Now, this doesn't mean you have to tear stuff apart or be particularly negative. Critical analysis means that you've got your strategic and tactical decisions, and you've got your knowledge of the research and the plans and the legislation, and you're bringing the two together. That's it. So you have a clear and specific critical analysis of the strategic and tactical decisions related to a critical incident. Very, very straightforward stuff. Then we've got a little section where it's supporting your argument with literature and other evidence. This is where you're synthesizing a range of relevant information from scholarly sources that convincingly supports your ideas. You're accurately adhering to a referencing style, and I don't mind if you choose which one you want to use in this particular assignment. You've got it in text and in your reference list, and you're acknowledging your sources all the way through your response. Now, note that this doesn't give you any sort of ballpark figure, but if you're aiming towards having one reference per paragraph, which really would be an absolute baseline, you're going to have at least 10 sources. And in order to be able to balance between the government documents and legislation and policies and your research, you're going to be looking at least half and half for this. So that just gives you a general sense of what you need to do in that respect. I've got some tips in there on how to write an essay. I'm not going to go through these because I know you've done essays before, and you can go and have a look at that in addition to the videos and other resources up online for you if you need a refresher in any way. I have, however, given you some examples from a good essay that has been done in the past, and I've got an example here of a paragraph introduction to show you what to include in there. You can see that we've got a nice introduction to the topic in the first couple of sentences, and then at the end we've got what this response will actually talk about. You know, the paper's divided into two parts. In the first part, I'll talk about the strategic stuff. I will then discuss the two main priorities. In the second part, I'll focus on the tactical management of the issue. I'll conclude by emphasising the need for continuous improvement. Very nice, straightforward, really well done introduction. I've also given you an example paragraph focused on public information. Now, this paragraph uses a lot of research evidence. I would not expect to see this level of work done in everybody's response, but nonetheless, it gives you a good example of what to consider and how to frame your writing. It doesn't have to be hugely specific and detailed. It can be quite broad as long as you're tipping your hat to the different areas that you need to cover off on. And of course, I've got an example conclusion so that you can see what that does. You need to summarise your main points and talk about, what to think about in terms of future practice and so forth. That's it, folks. I hope that was helpful. As per usual, if you've got any questions at all you need to do is get in touch and send me an email or text me to organise time to phone or whatever. So, yeah, just get in touch if you've got any questions and we can go from there. I hope you have a great week and day, and I'll chat to you all soon. Laters!